First of all, I would like to thank the opportunity to present this topic. So I will discuss or present a summary of the current version of a guide that is being produced by the Qualitative Analysis Working Group. First of all, I will start by mentioning how relevant these analyses are: qualitative analysis, the scope of the guide, types of these analyses, how to assess the performance of these methods, how to express the confidence in these results, and I will discuss briefly how to report that information. I will close with the conclusions and recommendations of the current version of the guide, and I will list the examples and also the working group members. Okay, we all know that chemical analyses are used to manage many relevant socioeconomic interests. Some of them are just qualitative analyses, others involve a qualitative and a quantification stage, but these analyses can only do their work properly if they are fit for the intended use. You can assess the fitness of this analysis for the intended use by evaluating the uncertainty from this type of results. And in this case, the result is not reported as in a quantification. So we have typically a result like present or not present, confirmed identity of a species or not confirmed identity. So you have these nominal properties, and the uncertainty associated with these nominal properties is rather different from how it is reported uncertainty in a quantification. So in a measurement uncertainty, you have typically a confidence interval that should include the reference or the conventional true value of the measurement with a non-confidence level. And in this case of qualitative analysis, since you report a nominal property, typically the uncertainty of this analysis will be the probability of that result being correct. Currently, accreditation bodies do not ask labs to assess the uncertainty of their qualitative analysis, but they ask labs to prove that this type of analyses are also fit for the intended use. The guide aims at assist labs in assessing the performance of their qualitative analysis, and when the performance parameters are reliable and fit to be reported, they can occasionally report the results of this analysis with this uncertainty, with the quantitative value of the reliability of this analysis. In this guide, we discuss two types of qualitative analysis. Some based on the qualitative criteria, like changing a color or any phenomena that you can check visually. For instance, determination of aliphatic aldehydes in a solution by color change after the addition of this shift reagent, or the identification of a blood type by the observation of agglutination. Sensory analyses are also an example of qualitative analysis that relies on qualitative criteria. But in some cases, you have an instrumental method of analysis that produces quantitative parameters, and your identification is based on comparing that quantitative parameter with the threshold, and from that comparison, you decide if the analyte is present or not present. In that case, some examples are identification by GCMS or by PCR, where you have that instrument being used for the identification. We can also identify somehow a third type of qualitative analysis that is related with the second one. That are the cases where you have a measurement result. So we have a measurement result typically with uncertainty, and we compare with a threshold with a maximum value, and after that comparison you report the item as conform or not conform with the specification. This is somehow a way of transforming a measurement result in a qualitative result, conform or not conform. And this type of qualitative analysis is only briefly mentioned in this guide, because we have Eurocamp CITAC guidance that details how to handle that type of situations. Recently, it was published the second edition of that guide. So how can we assess, quantify the performance of this qualitative analysis? So the easy way, I would say, at least easy to understand, is by calculating the rates of true and false results. For instance, but before that, you have to decide yourself what is considered a positive result, okay, and what is a negative result. Typically, a positive result is the presence of a compound, and negative is not confirming that presence, okay. And after that, you have to perform some tests to calculate true positive, false negative, or the true negative and false positive rates. The true positive is the probability of method when it analyzes a positive case. So a true positive case, a positive case, when it analyzes a positive case of getting a positive result, a correct positive result. So this is the true positive rate. When you have a positive case and the result from the method is negative, you have a false negative. So by testing the performance of your analytical methods from the analysis of positive and negative cases, you can calculate all these rates. In fact, since true positives plus false negatives are 100%, and true negatives plus false positives are 100%, you just need to know one of those terms from the first equation and one of those terms from the second equation. Typically, these rates are estimated from the experimental assessment of the performance of our method, and we can easily summarize the performance of our method using a contingency table. A table where it is reported how many positive and negative cases were tested. Imagine in this case 233 positives and 301 negative cases were tested, and how many times these cases produced positive, in this case true positive results, or false negative results, or false positive and true negative results. For instance, if you want to calculate the false positive rate, you just need to know how many negative cases produce a positive result, and by the ratio between these two parameters, you get the false positive rate. Usually, these rates are referenced to the total number of cases. This is also discussed in the guide. Okay, but this contingency table only reports the performance of the analytical method. I said only because usually we want more than just the performance of our analytical method. We want to know if the unknown sample that is being tested and got a positive result, if that positive result has high probability of being correct. So we are not so much, in many cases, interested in how many times positive cases get a positive result, but we want to know, in fact, what happens to the real sample. And it looks that the problem is similar, but in fact, to infer about the sample, the non-sample, you need other pieces of a puzzle, I would say a puzzle of probabilities. So we need to know the prevalence of negative and positive cases of the studied population. So we have here, imagine we have a population from where you take an item to be tested. Can be a food product, can be the urine of an athlete from a population of possible athletes. Okay, and you need to know what is the probability of getting a positive case or a negative case from that population. And only if you have that prior knowledge about the population, you can transform somehow performance data in information about the specific sample that is being analyzed. Let me give you an example. If you perform a COVID-19 infection test using a fast test, and if you have two populations, one with a very high prevalence of positive cases, so many people are infected there, and in another example where you have only few people are infected, if you take a person from this population and from that population and you test using the fast COVID test, and in both cases you get a positive result, the probability that the positive result is correct and that person is in fact infected is larger when the prevalence is larger. So we know we need to have this prevalence to close information gap about the information about the sample. And this is one of the tricky parts of using some metrics for assessing qualitative analysis results, because frequently we don't have good estimates of that prevalence. Another thing that we discuss in the guide is challenges of evaluating the qualitative analysis performance. If you look to the contingency table and the output from that contingency table, the rates that are more difficult to calculate, to estimate, are the false positive rates, because typically analysis should be very selective, so the probability of getting a positive result from a negative case should be low. And when we want to evaluate this parameter in a statistically sound way, first we have to face two issues. First, the analytical scope. So you must know the property, the metrics, and the method, including the criteria for the identification that is covered by the scope. Okay, and then you have to test the performance of the method for all this scope. And this can be difficult in some areas with wide application scope. And then the other issue associated with the evaluation of this performance is that the reliability of this performance number depends on how many tests you perform to get that number, how many tests you have in that contingency table. For instance, imagine that we have a test and we analyze 50 negative cases, and then we get a positive, so it will be a false positive, and we conclude that according to our calculations the false positive rate is 2%. Okay, but since we only perform 50 tests, the true value of the false positive rate should be between 0.35 to 10%. This is also discussed in the guide, how to get these numbers. And you can see that that 2% is a rather uncertain estimate regarding the possible true value of the false positives. Okay, imagine that you test 200 negative cases, which is much more work, of course, and you got 4 positive results. So we have also a false positive rate of 2%. But since your performance was assessed from more results, the confidence interval for 95% confidence of the false positive rate is 0.76 to 4.9%. So this confidence interval tells you for 95% probability what will be the value, the true value of the false positive rate. This confidence interval would be enough and good enough if you want to prove that the false positive rate is below 5%. So it is important to know how the reliability, the power of this test increases with number of cases to decide how many experimental data you need to collect to get the information that you need about performance. So the experimental assessment of these false positive and also false negative rates is demanding, and this is more difficult if we have very selective analytical methods. So a strategy to handle these limitations and difficulties is to start your method development by making an initial estimate of the performance, and then you start doing the analysis with your unknown samples, with an increased quality control and confirming frequently your findings as you collect more data to improve the estimate of the performance of your analytical method, because you need to test this with many samples and a diversity of cases. In some cases, if you have these analytical methods with the quantitative criteria, so if you have an analysis based on instrumental method of analysis, like a GCMS, you can somehow overcome some limitations of the experimental assessment of these rates by modeling signals. So if you develop models of how of the noise of a mass spectrometer, you can predict the probability of by chance a sample without analyte getting a false positive result. So we can do that by simulation, and this is very important because sometimes you have methods with a false positive rates of 0.01%, impossible to assess experimentally. Okay, and what about how to express the confidence, how to report information about the confidence on your analysis? A very popular metric is likelihood ratio that you get from Bayes' theorem, and for positive results, this ratio is ratio between true positives and false positives, and for negative results is ratio between true negatives and false negative results. And that rate, if you look to the rates, it sounds difficult. It looks difficult to understand the meaning of these rates because they express only the rates, the ratio of two rates that express the performance of your analytical methods. The interpretation of the meaning of this number is not trivial. But if you assume positive and negative cases are equally likely, so if you don't want to be committed about the prevalence information, if you assume that, you can say that a likelihood ratio of a positive result of 1,000 means that the positive result is 1,000 times more likely true than false. And now you can understand a little bit more about the meaning of this parameter if you assume that assumption. In forensic analysis for DNA match, for instance, they use likelihood ratios because they don't want to take decision on the quality of a specific evidence based on a prevalence, based on the prior knowledge. They want to take decision based only on the specific information from that analysis, and they use this likelihood ratio, and for them a result will be binding will be associated with strong evidence if the likelihood ratio is larger than 1 million. But this number is too high for some other analysis. For instance, if you want to identify a polymer of microplastics, you don't need to be so demanding regarding likelihood ratio of your identifications. A likelihood ratio of 19 should be okay, because environmental contamination is based on the analysis of on the identification of many particles from many samples. So you don't need to be so strict in a specific identification. One of the nice things about likelihood ratio is that if you have analytical methods based on two independent evidences, like identification by GCMS that is based on rotation time and mass spectrum, if you know likelihood ratio from rotation time and from mass spectrum, you know likelihood ratio from an analysis supported in both these evidences by multiplying the two likelihood ratios. So this is a very nice feature of this parameter. But if you really need to know the probability of the result of your unknown sample being correct, you need to take the prior knowledge about the system. So you need to know the prevalence of positive and negative cases in that population, and then you can use this formula. So the probability of a positive results being correct will be the ratio between the prevalence of positive and negative cases times the likelihood ratio of positive results divided by the numerator plus 1. As an example, so imagine that both positive and negative cases are equally likely, and if you have a likelihood ratio of 100,000, the probability of the positive results in that specific sample being correct is 99.999%, and no rounding should be used when you report numbers like this. Okay, reporting the qualitative analysis information is very important. You must be careful. Be sure, like for any type of analysis, that the information will be correctly understood, and so all relevant information must be reported in a clear way. The guide closes with some conclusions and recommendations. The first one is that you should assess false positives and false negative rates from your qualitative analytical methods. Likelihood ratio is a nice way of reporting that information. You should use adequate reference for your analysis, use adequate criteria, and if you are able to produce a reliable evaluation of qualitative analysis uncertainty, and if you are sure that that information will not be misunderstood, you can report that carefully. The guide presents all this discussion and something more, of course, and illustrates the application of the concepts in 6 examples, from GCMS analysis to PCR analysis, clinical and chemical analysis. So let me list the current members of the working group. We had other people involved in developing this guide in the early phase of development of this guide, that are not listed here, but they were also very important for this project. The guide was distributed for voting, and so if you are involved in this voting process, please not forget to send your votes and comments by July 5th. So thank you very much for your attention.